I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. On this week's show, Margaret Kelleher from the ICBF discusses the new culling index and how it identifies the best cows in your herd. And I started by asking about traditional selection methods for culling.
I suppose farmers had various different ways of doing it. The most typical example would be empty cows obviously would have to go first. Some farmers then would probably look at their late calvers. Other farmers might be stricter on that and look at their late calvers for their heifers. Another criteria usually would be their health status. So is there cell count in the herd? Is there lameness, mastitis? Is it an opportunity to get rid of problems by culling animals that way? And then other farmers then probably would look into their statistics on their milk recording. How are they performing on milk yield, solids and so forth? So again, various different ways. No farm is the same, but at the same time you need to calculate up the age of the cow, the genetic merit of the cow, what's her likelihood of surviving in the herd. So these are all kind of more complex issues and very hard to compare two cows maybe of the same genetic merit and performance but different ages, for example.
And I guess with culling, you know, this is traditionally a conversation we'd start having in, say, September, October. But due to the unprecedented weather conditions and the nature of the year with the spring and the summer we've had, you know, it's become very topical in the last 6 weeks. Would you have seen that in terms of an increased level of culling earlier in the year?
For sure, definitely in terms of people talking about it, we're getting a lot more queries on how to cull cows. Statistically wise, looking at the number of cows that have gone for culling this month was July 2018, we have seen an increase of maybe 5,000 more than last year and 4,000 on the year before. It's, you know, again, market price will probably have an influence on it, but definitely with the fodder crisis that's pursuing since last winter, and then again for the summer we have seen a peak in July and a peak in April this year. It's hard to tell as of yet, but certainly I would expect that we would see more cows going for culling in August and September this year than any other year that we've on record here.
And then in terms of the cow's own worth index, or we might call it the cow for the duration of our chat, what is the cow index?
So it's a new decision support tool for dairy farmers to rank each of their cows within their own herd. So what it does is it ranks them on their expected profitability for the remaining lifetime. So really the cow is looking at your herd, the number of cows in your herd, from the perspective of who's going to give me the most profit down to the least profit from today, and takes into account all her future lactations should she stay in the herd. So if I was to go into a small bit of detail on it, how would you calculate profit for the remaining lifetime? Well, we look at it in 3 stages of her life. First being her current lactation this year, what's the profit from this year? And if you keep her, so what's the profit she'll give you for all future lactations should she stay? And lastly also, we take into account if you were to replace her, how much would it cost and what's the net of that, given that you'd get a salvage value for that cow. So if we take the first one into account there, the current lactation, so what profit does my cow give me this year? Well, she's going to give it to you in her production traits, obviously, but also in her health traits, so her mastitis, her lameness, her cell count. Calving date is a very important factor. It's important to note that the cow is ranking cows in spring calving herds only at present. So calving date in this spring calving herds has to be early calving. We will also take into account the management and maintenance of the cow. So if farmers are culling their cows now, they probably are only looking at her current lactation performance. What the cow can do is also predict her future lactation performance. It's the second stage of a life that we look at. So again, we take it into a number of traits into account, all her production traits, her health, her beef traits, so any calves that she has, and from the calving, management, maintenance, and then also her descendants. So should she give you replacement heifers into the herd, that's also giving her future profit. But the most important thing about her future lactations is we also were able to predict her likelihood of being fertile within the herd and calving early every year versus calving late, her survival in the herd, and her cell count performance in the herd. And how we do this is we look at her genetic merit to start with, but also her age and her calving date in the herd, and look at all her past history and predict how would she perform in the herd. So if we take an example of a cow that has a history of high cell count, she's obviously a higher risk of having high cell count in the future. So age, again, having a big a factor on this as well. Third stage of profit we look at then is her net replacement cost. That's just the final part of the cow's own worth, where we just look at, if you were to cull her, you have to replace her with a heifer. So that's actually quite a high cost that some people don't take into account when they're removing cows from the herd. So if you remove a young cow from the herd, for example, you have to replace her with a heifer that's costing you over €1,500 to get into the herd to start with. That's quite a high cost, so it should be taken into account. And we also give credit then for the salvage value of the cow, that you were actually able to get some profit from her culling value.
And then just to pick up on something you refer to for current and future lactations, we talk about milk and fertility, and that's often discussed. It's the highest weighting in the EBI index. You mentioned you also have management and maintenance, and they represent a very small proportion of the EBI. Why are they important within the cow index?
Well, maintenance in terms of how much it costs to keep her in the herd. There is farmers, you asked at the start there, what culling criteria do farmers cull on? Some actually do cull on the weight of the cow that is now. I had a farmer ring asking about, the fodder crisis and how do I maintain these big cows? Should I cull on with big cows? So it is important in terms of her current lactation, future lactations, because they're being compared to all other cows within the herd. So, if there's two cows in the herd, one having a higher maintenance cost than the other, but producing the same milk, then it's the lower maintenance cow you want to keep.
So it's kind of like an efficiency measure, really.
Exactly, yeah.
And I suppose then, giving all the detail you've given us on the cow index, if you can think of a herd that you have looked at recently in relation to cow, can you identify, say, 2 or 3 key traits for the cow that was ranked best on the index and worst for that herd?
For the cows ranked best, it does vary within herd. Most of the time it will be down to the fact that their milk solids are fantastic compared to their contemporaries within the herd. So you might see even a first calver at the top of the list. So, when you compare her to a fifth lactation cow, that her milk solids mightn't look that great, but the fact that she's compared to her first lactation contemporaries, she could be the best in the herd. So age would rank them quite highly. Their genetic merit for, fertility and milk production traits quite highly, but the most common one would be the calving date. So given depending on the time of year you are looking at your cow profile, the cow profile ranks on calving date if that's all that's available to them. But at this time of year, the breeding season's over now for the spring calving herds, and if you have your inseminations in or your bull service activity information in or your scanning data in, it's going to actually rank the cows on expected calving date for next year. So it goes off the most recent information. So cows calving early, high solids, good genetic merit will be at the top of the list. Then for the cows at the bottom, what you should see is cows that have either a cell count issue or maybe they don't have it right now, but they had it previously, so she's in a high risk of having high cell count again. You would see old cows at the bottom of the list, low genetic merit cows at the bottom of the list, and definitely your low milk solid cows, low milk yield cows that are not performing as good as the rest of the herd, because it is all compared within the herd.
And then if we consider, the cow index is quite new and we've had the EBI for quite a long time at this stage. Is like the EBI is discretely different from the cow index. Is the cow index going to replace EBI or can they work in tandem?
It definitely is not to replace the EVI. EVI is there for breeding your cows, so it takes only into account the genetic merit of each of the traits that's in the EVI. Whereas for cow, we have, the genetics of the cow for sure, but we have so many other things. We have the age of the cow, calving date of the cow, her crossbreeding effects, if any, depending on the herd you have, and individual effects of the cow. So those don't get passed on. The age of the cow doesn't get passed on from parent to offspring, so that's why it does not need to be in the EBI. Whereas if you start breeding off the cow index, you're only going to reduce your genetic gain per year because it's ranking best to worst on profit in the herd, depending on her age, her calving date, now, and individual effects. So definitely top recommendation, do not mix them up. You use them in tandem. One EBI is for breeding and cow is for culling.
With that in mind, you mentioned crossbreeding. Do you see an effect on profitability of herds where they have crossbreds and, say, pure Holstein cows?
So when we did the pilot study last year before we launched the cow index, we actually did a lot of interesting research on this, and we found that so the crossbreeding effect is taken into account. So for their milk production traits, for example, for a first cross cow, you'll see that she gets a bump up of 3 to 5% on her production traits. However, if that cow has a late calving date or a high cell count, that profit is completely wiped. It's a very, very hard penalty for late calving or cell count or any kind of health trait. So, within hers, you will see maybe a Holstein and a crossbred ranking near the same, but should one of those cows suffer a late calving date or a high cell count, you'll see them completely ranked differently. And that's just going on the performance of the cow and her environmental effects around her.
And if we consider, the current situation on farms, some farms have limited information. They mightn't have engaged with the cow index just yet. Farmers may have a short-term view in terms of looking at the lowest yielders in the herd and considering them the passengers and culling them. That can be typically younger stock and, the better genetics in the herd. What is your advice here, Margaret?
I strongly advise to use the cow because, yes, it's very tempting just to remove from your milk recording list the lowest yielders, the lowest milk solids, but you have to take into account that a first calver is 22% off her mature capability. A second calver is still growing. She's 7% off her mature capability. So as you said, the cows ranked lowest on milk yield and milk solids will be your younger cows. So you would be removing cows that are young, that are costly to replace, that probably have higher genetic merit, that if they reach their mature capability have the potential to be better than the cows that you have now. So really and truly it should be on performance, the age of the cow as well, and her likelihood to survive in the herd, because it is so costly to replace your cows with a heifer at over 1,500 euros.
And if we, take a step away from the current situation on farms, what level of usage do you see with the cow index across your Herd Plus users?
So I suppose it is only available to Herd Plus users that milk record. So if we take that also the cow index only came out on the 31st of October last year, we have seen over 3,000 herd users use this. So it's more than we expected for something so new. All we know is that they've logged on. So really, but it is so new that people need time to get to grips with how it works. So at 60% usage, we're quite happy, and we are just hoping that it would be useful for the year that we're having. Especially, it is so topical. People need to cull and make their culling decisions earlier than ever this year. So hopefully, we'll see more usage of it.
Yeah, 3,000 is a considerably high number of dairy farmers to engage in such a new technology. Also then, aside from the current situation again, what can farmers do to get full value? You mentioned milk recording as one of the things, but what else can farmers do in terms of putting in information to get full value from the cow index as a reflection of the herd?
yeah, it's hugely important to have as much information as is available to you in the cow index. So what's great about it is there is a lot of automatic information in there. So we know the EBI of your cows, we know all the genetic merit of your cows, we know when your cows calve, so the calving dates can be taken into account. And as you mentioned, the milk recording comes in automatically, so we're able to rank on that. So what is down to the unique herd owner is how they breed their cows. So if you use 100% AI with a technician, that information should be coming in automatically. So that's fine. So again, there's not much they have to do in terms of actually manually putting in data. But for other herds where they might be DIY AI and that they are manually entering in the data, before using cow, make sure your information is up to date as possible for inseminations. Because it's going to rank your cows on expected calving date next year. And if you know a cow is empty, record her as empty. If you know you're going to cull a cow anyway, you should mark her as a mark for cull. If you have scanning information, this is brilliant information to use before using the cow index, because if you know the number of days that how old the fetus is, again, it makes a more accurate prediction of her expected calving date next year, so it'll rank your cows more accurately. And then other than that, really, I suppose there's lameness and mastitis that you can record. If you record that, it will rank your cows accordingly. And, if she had a mastitis issue this year, it'll remember that if you keep her for subsequent years, it will remember that she had a mastitis issue over the last few years, and it'll just highlight her should she ever have it again. So other than that, really, it is just health recording and fertility recording is the key information that should always be kept up to date before running it and making your decisions.
And I guess finally then, Margaret, in your opinion, say in an average year, what is the optimal time for farmers to look at the cow index and cull cows?
Again, I suppose it's whatever information is available to you. So just say you plan to scan, put in your scanning information and then use the cow information. Really, I suppose it was September was when we were advising all along, but already we have seen people using it in July, and we're predicting a higher usage in August for this year, given the circumstances farmers are in. But really, it's just if you have any information such as your scanning or breeding information, to get that in and then run it.
So, Margaret, where can we actually find the cow index?
So there's two ways to do it. If you were to log on to your Herd Plus account, so that's where you put in your herd number and your password. And when your profile loads, you go to your view profiles. And under that heading, you will see COW, Cow's Own Worth, and you click on it, and within a few seconds, you should see all your cows ranking straight away from number one being your best cow down to your worst. So if you want to cull any cows, you go down to the very, very bottom of your screen, see which cows it's selecting as your least profitable within your herd. You might find that some cows are not ranked in your herd. You will see up in the top left-hand corner of your screen a missing animals tab. If you click on that, you should see why your animals are missing. So a lot of times it could be that a cow is missing a sire, so we can't rank accurately because we don't know her full background, or she might be missing a milk recording or some other information detail that we need to rank the cow. Alternatively, if you have the ICBF app on your phone, you can also log into that and under view profiles, click on the COW and you'll see a smaller version where you see minimal information, but you can still see who's your best cow, who's your worst, and make your decisions based on that. We also have a few links on the screens to record events. So should you find that you've looked at your cows and you've ranked them and there's a cow that's empty at the top of the list, you can click on one of the links to record that she's an empty cow. So many other details like that. There's health information on the screens as well, and feel free to contact Herd Plus if there's any other issue.
That's great. Thanks very much, Margaret.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Margaret Kelleher for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple and Google Podcasts, and for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.